Hey guys, so welcome back to the eighth episode of our podcast, She Said What, where the four of us discuss the modern landscape as women. So, being so active on social media, we've all, heard of massive supermodel names like Josephine Scriver, Taylor Hill, Adriana Lima, and we've also obviously heard of the massive brand name Victoria's Secret, which is one of the leading lingerie brands of the world. But what most of us don't know is precisely how Victoria's Secret rose to its stature and the subsequent ups and downs it's faced. So let's kind of start off with its rise.
Obviously, since the 1990s, it's literally been one of the most iconic brands, not just in terms of its products, but like brand image as a whole. But how did it start? So in 1997, this guy called Roy Rooney started the brand after he went to a lingerie trip with his wife and he felt really uncomfortable entering the store. So he wanted to make Victoria's Secret kind of a women's underwear shop that was targeted at men. I don't know how that works, but what he wanted to do was make a store where men would feel comfortable going, and eventually, obviously, kind of worked, kind of didn't, because yeah, about a few years later, they almost went bankrupt.
So yeah, in 1982, like Inika said, they were starting to near bankruptcy, and this is when Les Wexner, who is the founder of L Brands, swooped in. L Brands is the parent company to a number of brands, including limited brands, and had actually built kind of an empire for himself by this point. He came in and he completely upturned Raymond's vision on its head. He decided that instead of like he completely scrapped the idea, and he decided that he's going to go back and have the narrative that this is a store which is made for women itself. He wanted to bring the vision of La Perla brands like that from the European side into US, and he wanted to create a brand that was looked luxurious, looked expensive, but in reality it was affordable and could cater to middle income people.
And along with this guy, Wexner, there was also another guy called Ed Razik who joined the Victoria's Secret team. And essentially, what he did is he introduced this iconic Victoria's Secret fashion show. And what was going on when Razik first joined Victoria's Secret and everything, they were literally trying to build the brand of a fantasy. So they introduced the fashion show, obviously, but they also introduced this concept of Victoria's Secret angels. So basically, what this Victoria's Secret Angels thing was that in around like 1997, they played a commercial introducing a new line of lingerie called the Angel Collection, and that had models like Tyra Banks and stuff like that. And soon after that, the word angels kind of became synonymous with Victoria's Secret. And to further that fantasy image, they had their, again, as I said, the iconic Victoria's Secret fashion show. Actually, when the fashion show first aired, I think it was like 1.5 million viewers tried to tune in, and that completely like crashed the site. And this was the very first time that the Victoria's Secret fashion show was airing. So I think it's safe to say by this point of time, Victoria's Secret had a very, very large amount of hype.
And I think adding on to that, like I think when Sharon Turney became the CEO, she kind of completely flipped over Victoria's Secret, gave it a completely different look. She transformed catalogs, magazines, photo shoots, and gave Victoria's Secret such a classy representation. And women were getting inspired, empowered by just looking at those pictures. And under Sharon Turney, the sales just massively doubled, the profits doubled, and the sales increased by over 70%. And needless to say, as Sanjana said, like such massive models like Giselle, Heidi Klum, Tyra Banks, they got their massive big break.
Obviously, all of this sounds so great, but at some point, things started to go down. So in 2016, Turney left the company. She resigned as CEO, and Leslie Wexner took up the position of interim CEO. And when he joined, he split the brand into three. So he split it into Victoria's Secret Lingerie, which was the main thing, and then he split into Pink, which was the teenagers brand. It was kind of aimed at a younger audience, at more casual wear, and Victoria's Secret Beauty, which was their makeup line. He also took away a lot of other elements as like the swimwear line, so he stopped that line and he made a lot of changes.
From 2015, though, is when this massive brand slowly started to decline. 2015 to 2018 was a period of really massive decline for such a huge brand. So, for example, that's in 2016, Jan Singer became the new CEO after Wexner, being the interim CEO, again stepped down. And that's when the sales, for example, from 2015, the sales of the next 13 quarters, the revenue actually ended up declining in 12 of those 13 quarters. And there was a 12% drop in same store sales, especially during the holiday periods as well. So just as the views of the fashion show, those also started declining, and there was a Same way, the stock prices of L brands also faced a really big decline. Everything in terms of Victoria's Secret really just started to decline. And consumers, and probably one reason for this is because the consumers' preferences also started to shift.
I think where it all kind of started to fall was when Victoria's Secret wasn't pleasing its customers like it used to. Like in this day and age, right, comfort is so important. The styles of what you're wearing, its design should feel comfortable to you for daily use. But I think Victoria's Secret kind of ignored the comfort part and focused more on like fancy and more sexy designs.
And another thing is that
Right. And
athleisure became a huge trend during that period, and Victoria's Secret was slow to adapt to that. For example, a lot of brands started, like a lot of other brands and lingerie brands started to focus more about unpadded, unwired lingerie, versus Victoria's Secret didn't have those kind of products like bralettes and things like that. And that's why consumers weren't able to get what they wanted from the store anymore, especially the younger demographic.
exactly, and like in the recent years, athleisure has grown, and what's been such a up and coming trend has been like natural beauty. So women don't really want to change their bodies and their how they look. They just want to accentuate what they already have. And along with that comes sports bras and bralettes. And Victoria's Secret didn't really cater that really well, like Risha said. And while Victoria's Secret did at some point come up with a sports line that they sold sports bras, the problem was that even then, what they were prioritizing was still like visual appeal rather than comfort. So while it did like it was slightly more practical than their actual lingerie line, it still wasn't at all comparable to things like Nike and Puma.
Yeah, and I think one thing that Victoria's Secret kind of did was that they continued to like emphasize this image of a fantasy, right? And like even at the beginning of its decline in like 2015, I think Aerie started like a no Photoshop campaign. And then in one of the interviews with Victoria's Secret ex-employee, she describes how like somebody like in this conversation with Victoria's Secret with the staff and everything, somebody just raised their hand and asked if Victoria's Secret would ever consider doing like a no Photoshop campaign. And the thing was, in that situation, it was kind of a joke. Like everybody was like, no, are you crazy? You might even get fired if you bring up stuff like that. And I think that's because one of the key people in Victoria's Secret at this point in time, Ed Razik, was sort of very, very hell-bent on this idea of trying to sell women a fantasy. And I mean, that could be a fantasy in terms of just like smoothing out people's skin, or not including plus size models, not including transgender people. And what Razik said in a Vogue interview was that he said that the Victoria's Secret fashion show should not feature transgender models because the show was trying to sell a quote unquote fantasy.
Exactly. And I feel like women are have various different body types, right? And the thing is that Victoria's Secret only catered to like one specific type, especially like fashion shows. They weren't very vast in terms of and very diverse in terms of what they were presenting. So women who were sitting at home and watching couldn't relate to what was being put out. They were like, this is not us. So that's where Victoria's Secret started to lose the grip over its customers.
Exactly. And like adding on to that, basically what Victoria's Secret was doing, and at this point, keep in mind, two of the main people in the administrative operations were Leslie Wexner and Ed Razek, both of whom are old men who have shown many, many times in the past to kind of like not to be very reluctant to keep up with changing attitudes and the changing beauty industry. Like Sam said, basically Ed Razek said, and I quote, that transsexuals should not be featured in the show because it's a fantasy. And I don't understand that. Like, what does that mean? Like, are they not women, or do in his fantasy only cisgender size 0 women exist? And even after this, Ed Razek didn't resign, and multiple other people in his situation in other companies have been forced to resign. But in his kind of situation, he's so untouchable. Him and Leslie Wexner, that they can do anything. They can make any and all kinds of business decisions. No matter how adversely they affect the business, they will still be where they are. And like, how can these men who have shown to really like not care for what women want today and how their attitudes and how their preferences are changing really decide what women want?
Exactly. So over time, it started to appear as though Victoria's Secret didn't actually care about consumers' voices. They weren't responsive, and they weren't taking into consideration their consumers' opinions. I mean, and then in talking about the whole body positivity issue, take, for example, Ashley Graham, a beautiful, gorgeous plus size model who wanted to be part of the show, and Victoria's Secret like just bluntly said no. And so when you talk about body inclusivity, right, and body positivity, Victoria's Secret, most of the models, they have so many different constraints that are put on them. For example, they have to be above 5'6" to about 6 feet in height. Their body proportion, the infamous 34-24-34 ratio that they have, I mean, that's unrealistic biologically as well. If you consider it, you can't expect a woman, I mean, I don't want to be crude here, but to have such a large chest and still have such a small waist, it doesn't work that way. And so like Krisha said, when women are seeing this kind of vision presented to them, seeing these kind of ideals, it's completely, you can't have these kind of expectations out of women.
Yeah, and I think that's where like the problem with this entire fantasy comes in, right? Because like other brands that like proved to be competition at the time, which like Airy, Third Love, and all of these things, like they were catering to the real woman. Like they were trying to be very realistic in their portrayal of women. Like they prioritized comfort. They had no Photoshop campaigns. They included body positive models and everything. And I think that's where Victoria's Secret was really, really slow in adapting. And that's the thing. Even if you go into Victoria's Secret store, even if they do sell like lingerie of like bigger sizes, they don't promote that in like their fashion show, their modeling campaigns and everything, because they're so hell-bent on this idea of like a fantasy. And I think that's where like, because it wasn't as realistic, consumers were not like drawn to it anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Like adding on to what Sanj said, basically, like you said, Airy and Third Love, they were catering to the real woman, but Victoria's Secret, they had this like idea of femininity, and obviously that has evolved over the years. But Victoria's Secret, what it's selling as a brand hasn't. And one of the main things that you need to stay relevant in the ever-changing fashion industry is like changing and keeping up in terms of marketing strategies and catering to what customers actually really want instead of what you think they want. And as we have discussed and we will go on to discuss, Victoria's Secret has failed through that time and again. But this worked well in the beginning. As shown, they became a multi-billion-dollar brand. It was huge. It was the biggest in the industry. It still is the biggest in the industry, even though it's declining. But for so long, they've made so many women in the world want to be like them. Like they established, like Risha said, the ideal body type, like 5'10", skinny, but somehow with those hourglass figures. And they kept making women try to buy their products, kind of like trying to make them believe that lingerie could make them fit into that extremely like small and somewhat oppressive stencil of the ideal woman. But now that's changing, right? Like we don't want that. Our idea of beauty is changing. We want representation. We want diversity in terms of like size, ethnicity, body shape, everything. And brands that don't like cater to these, they like lose out on such a huge customer base because obviously they're not selling products that fit people, but also the younger generation who's growing up in social media is also we don't want to buy things from brands like this because at the end of the day, like women shouldn't have to change themselves to fit into clothes, right? Like their clothes should be made to fit them.
I agree with that, and I definitely think that that's one thing. Like, again, people would not want to buy from something that's not that realistic. But at the same time, I feel like the stereotype of like what the ideal woman should be that Victoria's Secret is trying to like propagate is like that's really bad. Like you see all of these things on like Pinterest and YouTube and things like that. Like, oh my god, the Victoria's Secret diet, the Victoria's Secret workout regime, and like why? Again, if you keep propagating this idea that like only tall, slender women are beautiful, then like that's such a harmful stereotype. And like me, like myself included, right? Like this is kind of hypocritical for me to say, but like every time I see like the Victoria's Secret fashion show, I'm like, oh my god, like she's so attractive, she's so beautiful. And I start like automatically, subconsciously like comparing myself. I'm like, shit, like why am I not like that? Why am I not like able to do this? Why am I not as skinny and things like that? And that's so harmful, especially when you have such an impressionable audience with the pink collection and everything. I feel like you should be a lot more realistic in your marketing strategies. You get what I mean?
Exactly. I feel like this might be a little controversial to say, but I feel like what Victoria's Secret initially started to do was to sell this male fantasy, as Sanjana was saying. But like, women don't want to be like, we all aspire to be that way, right? But there is a limit to everything. And I feel like the body type that Victoria's Secret was selling is to cater to a male fantasy. Men want like, a big chest, slender body, and hourglass figure. But that's not reality, right? That's not catering to women exactly. So there's this imbalance on in what Victoria's Secret is providing and what people actually want.
Another thing that went wrong was that Victoria's Secret, when it started to become big in the 80s. It was huge in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and a lot of that was kind of because of their huge presence in shopping malls. That was when shopping malls rose to prominence, and Victoria's Secret, because L Brands was smart enough to realize that it would be the next big thing. They brought a lot of land, and in almost every mall in America, there was at least one Victoria's Secret, and it was one of the biggest stores. But then all of a sudden, online shopping rose in prominence. Like we said, consumer preferences changed. They wanted comfort. They didn't want to go out of their house every single time to go and buy underwear. And as that happened, the malls and the stores situated and then suffered. And Victoria's Secret has always, we've discussed this, they've always had this kind of like trend of behaving in a way where they fail to reflect the evolving attitudes and customer preferences in the world, and like more specifically the beauty industry. So as malls declined and they didn't really adapt to the online retail spaces quickly, their sales, their shares, everything just suffered.
Yeah, and perhaps another reason that they declined is, so for example, we talked about the outward appearance and what they were actually projecting in terms of the marketing strategy. But other thing is that a lot of things are happening within the company itself that were really horrific. I mean, for example, we talked about Razik and how he was such an influential man and such an important role in Victoria's Secret's rise. Right, he started the entire fashion show. That was like his baby. And then he actually, for example, like Sanj mentioned, the whole transgender thing where he was like, no, we're not going to allow that because I don't want that, quite frankly. And another thing is that he's been called upon, a lot of allegations made against him in terms of he was known to harass models and things like that as well. And so these are a lot of things that we don't even realize. And it's not just that people are bad within the company too. That's not the only thing. There are people who have stood up. For example, there was a woman banked in Capital, and she is actually a major shareholder in Victoria's Secret. And during one of their board meetings, this came out in an interview later, she actually called out Razik and the other members of the board. There are actually 12 board members in Victoria's Secret, and out of those, 9 happened to be men. And so she was really, obviously, this is a very surprising point. So she told them that this is completely unfair, which makes sense. And in the end, 3 of them, they ended up resigning, and 3 women they took on just to have an equality 6-to-6 ratio, like 1-to-1 ratio. But I think a lot of things happen behind screens, behind things that we don't even know about, that also affected, like, slowly as they came into view, consumers, in terms of how, like, we are so aware now, our generation is so, we take into all these things into consideration. And so once these came into light, consumers, another reason that they started to, in terms of ethics and stuff, they decided not to buy from this brand.
One of the other main things that kind of like led to their demise was Leslie Wexner's connection with Jeffrey Epstein, who, if you didn't know, was a millionaire sex offender. So Epstein managed uh, all of Wexner's money. He was the trustee for the Wexner Foundation and multiple other family trusts. And also, Epstein's Manhattan House was first owned by Leslie Wexner. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that they've been known to be close friends. They've made many public outings, and they've like spoken about their friendship in interviews as well. But obviously, after the whole Epstein scandal happened and his being a child sex offender came out, the public obviously questioned Wexner's judgment after he was so closely associated with someone like that. Like, how can you entrust someone like that with all of your money? And is that like a really severe lapse in judgment? Like, is someone who was so shrewd with his business, can he really be like dumb enough to fully trust a person like that and not know what was going on behind the scenes, or did he know and like overlook it? Like, that was such a big question to the public. And obviously, again, it goes back to ethics and all of that. Can we really trust this person with like your brand and everything?
Exactly. I think, like, as you spoke about ethics, right? There was this other thing that happened. So in 2007, Victoria's Secret received backlash because apparently it was into child labor and slavery. So I think that that factor comes in when consumers are actually going to a store or online shopping or buying the product. So they prioritize ethics of a company, which may have, like, stopped them from buying as much products as they used to.
So now we've covered size inclusivity a little bit, we've delved into that. But another major source of backlash that the company faced was because of the cultural appropriation that it propagated through its fashion shows. And there are many instances of this. I'm just going to talk about a couple of them. One of the biggest ones was back in 2012 when Carly Kloss, she actually wore this Native American headpiece, and it was for the calendar issue, the calendar catwalk, and she was representing November and Thanksgiving. And so what she was basically doing is she had glamorized the horrific genocide of, like, these Native Americans, of millions of people, and she turned it into like, the brand, not her. The brand had turned it into such a skimpy outfit. And there's so many other instances of this, like Elsa Hosk, when there was the fashion show that took place in China, she ended up wearing this dragon over her, like, draped over her body, and this received again so much backlash. Consumers were outraged. And the things that they not only have they like use these like very use these articles of clothing that mean a lot to the culture and where they come from. They stand for so much, but also they've been wronged in so many cases. For example, in one of the fashion shows, they actually end up putting body paint on the models, like just black stripes and stuff. And this is supposed to represent the body paint and the art of these indigenous people, but just by putting a couple lines, they'd completely misappropriate the culture, and it was very horrific to even see. And they end up pulling these things out of the show, but consumers still got to know about them, and this is why they stopped again. Another reason why they stopped buying from the brand.
I mean, they obviously did face a lot of backlash, but did they like stop? Like, did that stop the sales or like anything like that? I don't think so. Apart from the like natural decline and everything like that, I don't think that they really managed to like change that much. And I think that's primarily because Victoria's Secret is always, not always, but I think after the like really rapid rise in sales and everything, I think they just sort of had this image that like, oh, we're the best, like we're gold and like nobody else can touch us. And it's sort of like they're better than all the other brands. And that's because they have been like market leaders for quite some time and things like that. But like, it's also very important for brands to be conscious of the environment that they're in, and not only in terms of like cultural appropriation or like changes in consumer preferences, but like also just at least being respectful of other brands. Like I know Ed Razik in that one Vogue interview that I mentioned, he called out Third Love and he was like, we're nobody's third love, we're their first love. And like, what's the need? Like I honestly found that a little bit like petty. Like why do you have to do that? Because like Third Love is growing. Obviously, like Victoria's Secret, even though it's like declining and everything, it's still larger than Third Love. But that at least Third Love is listening to their consumers and changing their products accordingly, changing their platforms accordingly. And I think just Victoria's Secret, because they've been the leaders for so long, they're like quite reluctant or like slow to change. And I don't know. I don't think that's gonna help them out in the long run.
I think the thing is that consumers, we have a very specific image of Victoria's Secret as a brand. And, the whole marketing strategy is very specific. The range of products that they have is very particular. And so it'll be really interesting to see how in the coming years, will they adapt? This brand, which has such a specific image, will they be able to change and become something else? Will they be able to transform and cater to the coming generation consumers' changing tastes?
Okay, this is something that I just like I wanted to ask you guys, like just like as an open-ended question again, just like tell me what you want to think about this. But like, do you think Victoria's Secret was so successful because they built such a specific niche? And do you think that if they like break down that niche and start like becoming more inclusive and things like that, do you think their like brand image gets diluted and so the sales will fall even more?
Honestly,
Okay,
not at all.
here's what
Because
I think. Here's what I think. I think it's very like time relevant, right? Because when they came out and the niche that they came out with was like a very small stencil of what it means to be an attractive woman. And at the time, people accepted it. And at the time, they were able to convince people that this is what you need to be for you to be desirable. But now, and I think a lot of it is our access to social media, and we can see and we know that like that body type is not real. And now, because with like growing awareness amongst consumers, I think kind of expanding their niche definitely will help sales, because at the end of the day, what younger consumers want is inclusivity, and we are a lot more quote unquote woke than their older consumer base. And if they kind of cater to what we want ethically and make it look good, then why is that a bad thing?
no, and another thing is that we have so many brands. Take like Fenty Beauty and like you said, Airy Beauty and things like that. They have a niche. They are selling one product, but at the same time, they are catering to a wider audience. And I think Victoria's Secret, the only thing they can do is gain from this. They've declined so much. Their sales dropped. I think they lost like almost like 10% of their market share just completely dropped, evaporated in like a span of 3 years. And so the only thing they can do now is try to change. They don't have a choice, I think, quite frankly.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and especially right now because there's so many brands like Risha, you said, like Fenty Beauty and Airy and Third Love and all of these brands. They're trying to portray a realistic what a realistic woman looks like. You get what I mean? I feel like if Victoria's Secret starts doing that, because of the sheer power that they have over their consumers, like you don't like I keep saying this, but like there's a Victoria's Secret diet, there's a Victoria's Secret workout regime. Like if Victoria's Secret starts portraying more realistic people, like if they start getting in like trans women, or if they start having plus size model walking or like things like that, then I feel like they'll be more like closer to their consumer base, if that makes sense, because they're being more realistic. And as Inika said, like Gen Z is like going to be purchasing Victoria's Secret more now. I mean, like that's Gen Z is going to soon become like Victoria's Secret primary target audience. And I think that, again, not everybody, but definitely I would like to say like a good majority of Gen Z is quote unquote woke. And because we're like that, I feel like we would like to see more diversity in the kind of models that Victoria's Secret's using, or the kind of products that they're making, or whatever. I think that if they make themselves a little bit more realistic, I think that that would like help out their sales a lot. Especially because, like, dude, 2019 Victoria's Secret fashion show got cancelled because their sales like dropped so much. So I think becoming more realistic might like help them out because of how rapidly the consumer base is changing. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on it. And we would love to know what you guys want to say about this episode as well. With that, I think that's a wrap on today's episode. If you guys are listening to this on Spotify, then just text us on any of our social media platforms with your thoughts about the situation, and we'd love to reply. If you're listening to this on Instagram or YouTube, just leave us a comment section below and we'll reply to that as well. I'm dude, I'm really not gonna say keep vibing again. Can somebody else do this, please?
I did it last time you roasted me, so no thank you.
Okay, fine then. I guess nobody's doing it. Bye guys, we'll see you next time.